Hello, and welcome to BookTrib's live chat. We are so excited to have Peter Leonard, the author of Eyes Closed Tight, with us today, and I can see by the amount of questions already coming into the queue that his fans are too. As you are well aware, Peter is the author of several other great novels, such as Back from the Dead, Voices of the Dead, All He Saw Was the Girl, Trust Me, and Quiver. But before we begin, I would like to remind everyone to log on to BookTrib at the end of the chat and enter to win a copy of Eyes Closed Tight. In addition to receiving the book, you will also be reminded of exciting live chats, interesting book giveaways, and wonderful articles written by our sensational editorial team. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce one of my favorite authors, Peter Leonard. Peter, hi, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I was wondering,
Pleasure to be here, Joe.
oh, it's our pleasure to have you. Be sure of that. I'm wondering if your fans know that you began your career not as the novelist that you are today, but in advertising, and that you owned your own agency for more than 30 years. So I'm interested in how and why the switch.
Well, I was bored out of my mind. That's the simple answer. And as I was getting older, I thought if I'm ever going to write a novel, I better do it. And there was I had an epiphany. I had made an ad pitch to Volkswagen, and the ad manager took my first idea on a storyboard and flung it across the conference room like a frisbee. And although I did end up selling a campaign, it was a frustrating experience, another frustrating experience. And I stopped to visit my father on the way home, and he was wearing a Nine Inch Nails T-shirt and jeans and sandals, and I was wearing a blue blazer and a shirt and tie, and I felt like the dad, and he was the kid, and he was writing a novel and was very excited about it. And I thought he's doing something he loves, and I'm not. So, I think that was the day. And a couple months later, I started writing Quiver, and on the strength of it, got an agent and a publisher.
Peter, you mentioned your dad, so I need to say to those out there who don't know that your dad was a very famous thriller writer. And I'm wondering, because I've also read that your style of writing and your characters have been compared to your dad's. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's inevitable, and I can't really escape his long shadow, and I accept it. I got into his profession, and so I take the consequences. But I would say that being around my dad all my life, he obviously influenced me, and I could hear his advice over and over again. Let your characters tell the story. Keep it simple. Don't overwrite. These kinds of things. So I tell the story really, the way I do it, and I think that I look at the world in a similar way to the way my father did. So our styles are somewhat similar but different.
Mhm. And what he said about keeping it simple, it sounds simple, but I bet that's the hardest thing to do when you get into the writing, that the paragraphs continue to go on, and yet you have to pull back in order to make them come alive and to keep the storyline just running at a mile a minute. I'm wondering, your dad wrote for so many years. Did he admire, or who did he admire as fiction writers of his era?
Well, he loved Hemingway,
No.
and he actually copied Hemingway when he began. He would put a piece of paper over uh, a Hemingway story page, and he would write it the way he wanted to write it. And so that's how he learned to write. And my dad said, "Well, if you're going to write, you're gonna copy someone. You're going to try to emulate someone, and that's just the way it is. Every writer who begins has somebody else in mind, someone else's style and sound, and I think that was helpful to hear. But regarding Hemingway, my dad said he didn't have a sense of humor, and my father was a very funny guy, and you can see it in his prose.
Hmm. How do you think fiction writing has changed since your dad began writing?
Well, I think that there are many more writers trying their hand at it, and it's I think it's still you know pretty much the same. Uh, Although there are authors who collaborate on books. James Patterson comes to mind. Um, that's something that drove my father crazy. That he said, "How can two guys write a book? Whose style is it? Whose sound is it?" So that has changed the industry a bit. But other than that, I think you still write the story the same way, and fiction authors are telling good stories.
I totally agree with you on that. And Patterson happens to have he's got he's got it down as far as being able to write with collaborators and making it sound like one voice. But I have a question from one of your fans, Henry Birdsong, and he has written, I read the interview your dad did with you. He asked you if you thought your style would change. Did you find your style was changing when writing Eyes Closed Tight?
Well, I think my style has changed a bit in 6 books. With the first one, I don't think I really knew what I was doing, and there is a lot to learn when you're writing a book. And I think that I just have a better feel for uh, the um, the whole process now, and so my style has, I think, gotten a little bit tighter and better. The sound is more professional. I just feel I'm more confident in doing what I'm doing.
Henry added on to his question with, do you think reviewers are comparing your work to your dad's?
Definitely, almost every review my father's mentioned. Peter Leonard, son of world famous crime writer Elmore Leonard, and it usually goes from there. Or Peter Leonard has not learned any of his father's whatever. So yes, it happens, and
It, it's
so
pretty good
what
company
I
to keep, though.
did, yeah, it is good company. So I wrote a book. All he saw was the girl that takes place in mostly in Rome, Detroit and Rome, and I wrote Voices of the Dead, which is a about a Holocaust survivor, and it takes place in Munich and Florida and Detroit. So I'm going great distances to get out of my father's shadow.
Oh, very much so, very much so. Um, Another fan, Lydia, asks, do you like to write or is it just something you do to pay the bills?
No, I like to write. I love it's the most satisfying thing I've ever done. And I used to, as a kid, watch my father, and I thought, boy, how can anyone sit in a room all day and do this? And now that I'm doing it, I feel that the day isn't long enough. That I'll think, oh God, it's already noon, and then it's 3 o'clock. I wish I had a few more hours because I really enjoy it.
Do you feel isolated though, Peter, coming from the advertising world where phones are ringing, 24/7 and clients are in and out and the world seems to be going faster than, you can keep track. Now, do you feel isolated? This is a very solitude kind of endeavor when one goes to writing, that you're alone in the room
It,
with the computer and probably your dog. I'm sure your fans know about him.
right, I have Sam next to me most days, although he isn't at the moment. But yeah, it's a solitary profession, and yet I don't think of it because I'm engrossed in what I'm doing. I'm concentrating on my story, on my characters talking and telling readers what they're seeing, how they think about the world, and so time flies. And my wife thinks I'm a shut-in. She said, "You got to get out more." Well, I do go out to lunch with friends, and I go to concerts and sporting events and movies. So I'm not, I do more than just write.
So for 2 weeks that the Olympics were on, were you busy watching TV or writing or a little bit of both?
Both. I mean,
Ah.
because the Olympics, I typically watched at night, and so I did my thing during the day. I quit about 5:30 every day, and then make dinner. I'm the cook in the house, so and cooking is a good way to kind of unwind. I open a bottle of wine, and I'm still thinking about what I wrote that day, and I may run into my where I write, the den, the where I am right now, and and write a couple of notes. And in fact, I do that almost every day. And then I finally try to put the book aside and talk to my wife, my daughter, my son, whoever happens to be home.
Jamie would like to know. She says that most of your novels are about crime. Do you watch any crime shows?
I've been watching True Detective this year, which I think is really good. I watched Justified. Uh, I've I actually I like crime. I like crime TV shows. I've read hundreds of crime novels, and I find crime fascinating, criminals fascinating, and that's why I happen to get into crime fiction.
Lauren asks a question that has to do with your dad again. I hope you don't mind all these questions about your dad, but I guess that's obvious since
Oh,
his career was, absolutely fantastic, and people are still talking about him and buying his books. But Lauren says that back in 2013, there were talks of you finishing your father's last novel. Have you pursued that? Tell me about it because that's something I didn't know.
yeah, he Elmore wrote the first act of a novel called Blue Dreams, and one of the characters was a bull rider named Kyle McCoy, and he was seeing a bull rider groupie named Celeste, and so my dad would come for dinner at my house a few days a week. He was divorced last year, and or 2012, and he would tell me about what he wrote that day, and and then when he died, I read the manuscript, and people said to me, "Are you going to finish your dad's book?" And I thought about it and decided that it would be a mistake because I would be concentrating on trying to make make my writing sound like his, and I think critics would have a field day with that. And I thought just leave it alone. I'll do my own thing. One idea that's come up, I may write a book with one of my dad's characters, Raylan Givens, the U.S. Marshal, who's
Oh.
really he's the hero in the TV show Justified. So
Hmm.
that's, I think, viable. And I've actually been doing some research. I visited with U.S. Marshals in El Centro, California, which is about 9 miles from the Mexican border, and talked to them for a couple of days. And then I visited with the top brass of the San Diego U.S. Marshals office, and they've been very helpful. And so, I have notes, and I have a lot of stuff. I just haven't had a chance to do it yet because there are many other things I'm doing.
Well, that explanation runs right into another question from Ashley on research and how much research goes into your crime novels. Are most of the scenarios accurate when it comes to the justice system?
Well, I think the Eyes Closed Tight, for example. I before writing it, I spent about a month hanging out with Detroit Police Homicide, and I read old case files and talked to detectives and went to crime scenes, and I saw a lot and heard a lot. I have 50 pages of notes, and I think I got it right because I used examples from cases that I'd read about, and I have ballistics information from actual cases. So when you deal with guns, there's always a gun nut who says, "Oh, you didn't get that right. That gun would never have that kind of ammunition, things like that." But I'm quite sure I did get it right, and I don't know that much about the criminal justice system. That isn't involved in my work. I'm more concerned with criminals and cops.
Are they usually forthcoming in answering your questions? Sometimes the law enforcement people can be a little close to the vest. Do you find them easy to deal with?
Well, I think they're close to the vest if they think you're a reporter, because they can burn some.
Touche.
But, and I think that, at first, the homicide detectives in Detroit were wary of me. But the more they saw me and got used to me, they started to offer information, and so they would start telling stories about interesting cases, and it was really something. It was great.
Jenkins, speaking of bringing your characters to life, asks that, or says that, you have a real talent for bringing characters to life. I love this book immensely. When writing these characters, do you have it already planned that you'll use them in other novels?
Well, Eau Claire, the main character of Eyes Closed Tight, was in my second novel, Trust Me, and so I knew him and I liked him a lot. And he's a minor character in Trust Me, but I thought when I wrote that book, I thought I'm going to use Eau Claire again. Eau Claire is actually a guy I went to high school with, and he's modeled after the real Eau Claire is the character's modeled after the real guy, who is a big ruddy-faced Irishman, and a guy I've known for 40 years, and it that helped ground the character in reality. Picturing this real guy, Eau Claire, and then Virginia, who was in Eyes Closed Tight. I liked her a lot too, and she was emo in that book. She wore a dog collar and had purple hair and a tongue stud and a lip stud and a nose stud, and then she meets Eau Claire, and they move to Florida together, and she cleans herself up, and she's a beautiful girl now, with her natural dark hair and all the jewelry out of her face, and so I see myself using them again. In fact,
Do you have to read your novels in order? Or if I wanted to give Eyes Closed Shut as gifts, would I have to give them the first novel before giving them Eyes Closed
uh,
Shut?
no, no. I think that the only two that you'd have to read in order, or should read in order, are Voices of the Dead, and the sequel is Back from the Dead.
Hmm.
But the others they all stand alone. You wouldn't have to read Trust Me uh, uh, to understand what happens in Eyes Closed Tight.
Oh, that's
I mean, it
good.
would help probably, because it's how Eau Claire and Virginia meet. So it's interesting, but it's not
Hmm.
essential to read that book first.
Ashley would like to know a very important answer to this question about the importance of reviews and the importance that you place on reviews and how do they influence the way you write moving forward.
They don't influence the way I write at all.
Good.
The way I look at it, people like certain things. People talk about books they like. They talk about movies they like, songs they like, and everyone doesn't like everything. And so I'm trying to find a particular group of people who like crime fiction and like the way I write it. But I don't pay too much attention to reviews, because I don't know the reviewer in most cases, and it doesn't really matter. If I get a bad review, it bothers me for a day or two. And in fact, I asked my dad the same thing. I said, Elmore, what do you think when you get a bad review? And he said, bothers me for 2 days. I said, God, it's amazing. I felt the same way. So
Yeah,
don't
because so
care about
much
it.
time goes
Really,
into it. I mean, yes. Of all the characters you've created, Do you have a favorite? Is it possible to have a favorite after writing all these books?
I don't think it is, but I mean, I do like Harry Levin in Voices of the Dead, Holocaust survivor, scrap metal dealer in Detroit. I like the odds that he overcame to get out of Nazi Germany, and just he's a low key guy who can handle himself, and he's a ladies' man. So I mean, I
Ah.
just there are things about the guy I just think are great, and I could see him coming back again.
Hmm.
I like Eau Claire, and I believe that he will definitely come back in another novel. Um, but the bad guys I love, but most of them die, so I can't bring them back.
Well, unless you were doing soap opera, then you could bring them back a million times and just say they were in the shower, like they did on Dallas.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe I start with a book before that particular
yes,
movie. So.
yeah. Do you see any of your books, or are you hoping that one of the Hollywood producers come knocking on your door to say, this is the one we want, we'd like to do a movie? And if so, which one would it be?
Well, all he saw was the girl has it has been optioned as a film, and
Oh,
I
that's
think that would
exciting.
make a great movie. It's set in Detroit and Rome, Italy, and Rome is a spectacular city. I lived there for a year, and I think this would be a great action film. Voices of the Dead. I have an agent in Hollywood who's trying to sell it as a TV series. Voices and
Hmm.
Back from the Dead, and I have an agent in Hollywood who's reading uh, Eyes Closed Tight. So we'll see.
Hmm.
Uh,
A lot of
it's a
times
tough job.
when novels are transferred to the screen, producers are leery of having the novelist also write the screenplay. How would you feel if you had to hand this over to complete strangers to write for the film version?
Well, I don't think it would bother me because after writing the book, I feel that I'm finished with the story, and I think screenwriting it is a particular discipline. I mean, I know I can do it, but there are guys who are really good at it, and I'd be fine with it. Although saying that, I'm thinking of all of the adaptations of my dad's books that were terrible, and so you just have to you got to go with the right people. You got to find the screenwriter director who can translate the material and hope for the best, I guess.
And make sure that your entertainment lawyer has some clauses in the contract that give you the final sign off. That's for sure.
Right.
Um, how would what advice do you have for aspiring young writers who are thinking about starting their first novels?
Well, I would say if you want to be a writer, you have to write. You have to treat it seriously. You have to sit down every day and do it. You can't think about it or talk about it or say, "Oh God, I'm going to write a novel, in a few months or next year or next week." You have to sit down and begin. And I think if you can just make a little bit of progress each day, it's gratifying. And if you can develop characters and tell the story through the eyes of those characters in shifting points of view, and begin to get a feel for how to do it, I think that it works itself out. And but I think you got to do it. You have to be serious about
And they shouldn't be discouraged after giving it their all and finally, finishing a novel if they're rejected, because I hear about a lot of rejections happening with authors, and then bingo, a publisher comes along and says, yes, we're interested, we want to publish this novel. So do you have to have a really thick spine to be in this business, or just the absolute love of writing and the ability to just continue, like you said, whether a reviewer doesn't like your book or likes your book, it really comes from you, from what is within yourself. and how to go on and get past that.
I think if you want to write, you'll write more than one book. If the first one gets rejected, you come up with another idea, and keep going. I was thinking about John Grisham. He had written, I think, a couple of books before the first one that he sold, and so after the success of his first novel, the title escapes me, the publisher wanted everything he had, and that happens, fairly frequently.
I'm glad he didn't stop writing. He's another one of my favorites. When you find yourself getting writer's block, how do you find and where do you find your inspiration from?
It's a good question. Uh, what I do is I look at it as problem solving. That's what writing is. Writing is rewriting and problem solving. And if I get stuck, and I do occasionally, maybe the scene I'm writing is told from the wrong character's point of view. So I'll reverse it. And so, say for example, Eau Claire is telling the story. The scene is told from his point of view, and it doesn't work. Well, maybe it's better from Virginia's point of view.
Mhm.
Sometimes, often that solves the problem, but sometimes that doesn't solve the problem, and you have to just either get rid of the scene and move on, or think of something else. I just push through. My dad always said, "Don't." There's no such thing as writer's block. You have to sit and figure out the solution. So that's what I try to do. He was a good teacher, I have to tell you.
He certainly was. I can see it in your work and in what you've written about your dad and what others have written about your dad. You had a very good teacher to guide you in this profession. But I want to also talk about your next novel, Unknown Remains. It's due out next year. Can you tell your fans a little bit about that and where it is in the process?
Well, the book is finished, and it begins on the morning of 9/11. Um,
Oh,
two collectors who work for a loan shark are they pull up to the World Trade Center Plaza, and they're talking, they're waiting, and one of them says, "Okay, I'm going to go," and he's going to go up to the 84th floor of Tower One to get the money from the guy from Parliament. And so this is the day of reckoning, and
mm,
as the collector's crossing the plaza, the first plane hits. So
mm.
the idea here is that while it was as tragic as it was, I was thinking that maybe this event was also an opportunity for someone to get out of something, to get out of a bad situation, and so that's kind of the premise. I don't want to give away too much.
No, that's really interesting. I can't wait to read it. Does it have what? Do you know the timeline? Do you know when it would be published?
Well, I hope next year. Yeah, I think a year from now probably.
Hmm. Well, Ruthie, I guess she's into to googling about what is the next great thing coming down the pipe. She says that next week is Pie Day, and she would like to know what your favorite kind of pie is.
Huh. Um, well, I like apple, I like cherry, and rhubarb, which is an
Hmm.
odd one. I'd say those three.
You say that you cook. Do you also bake?
I don't. No, my wife bakes, and I do all the cooking, all the other cooking, I should say.
Hmm. Jenkins asks this very interesting question about if you could go back into Eyes Closed Tight and modify something about just one of the characters, which one would it be, and what minor detail would you change?
Well, I wouldn't change anything because I really beat it up. I mean, I wrote the book, and then I let it sit for about a month and a half, I gave it to my former business partner, Tim Mayer, and he's a smart guy and a writer. And he read the book and gave me some suggestions. And and I thought he had some good ideas. So I cut about 16,000 words, 15,000 words, and rewrote just a little more than that. And so I think I really caught everything and made a much better book based on this, extra look at it and based on Mayer's comments. And so I don't think I would change anyone or anything because I changed so much along the way.
How has living most of your life in Detroit shaped your writing? So I know you were born in Detroit. Your father is
Yes,
known as, yeah, what was his, he had a pen name or a, what did they call your dad?
Dickens of Detroit.
A Dickens of Detroit. Why did they call him that?
So
I mean,
because
obviously because of the,
right, because Charles Dickens wrote great characters and dialogue. So
uh-huh.
my father did the same. So he's the Dickens of Detroit. He always said to me, "Well, what if we were living in Columbus? What would I be called? Or
Oh.
Boston or somewhere else? You know?"
So is it hard for you? I mean, you set some of your
Oh,
characters
I'm
in
sorry. You're
Detroit.
now back to the question. Detroit is a tremendous city. It's the promised land. It's if you want to write crime fiction, you couldn't pick a better place. It has everything you want as a crime writer. It has ethnic neighborhoods. It has big time sports. It has a music scene. It has great restaurants. It has a thriving dope industry. It has a lot of crime, more crime than you can imagine. So put it all together, and it's great.
Well, and this has been a great half hour, and I would be remiss if we didn't say that the next time we see you, I think we have to see Sam too. And does he ever appear in any of your novels? Your dog?
No, no, he has not yet, but he will.
Maybe you can make him the hero.
It's a good idea.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed your time with us as much as we enjoyed our time with you. And we can't say thank you enough, Peter, for everything that you've given us and the wonderful books that you've allowed us to be a part of. And we can't wait for next year for the newest one to come out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. It's been a pleasure. A lot of fun.
Thank you.